Good evening. I'm Victor Lay, the City Administrator of the City of Spring Hill. I'd like to welcome you to this evening's virtual meeting on the progress of the preliminary design phase of Buckner Lane Widening Project. We intend for this meeting to be interactive. Occasionally, we'll pop up a question on your screen. We'll hope that you'll answer it and participate with us. We'll be joined tonight by representatives of the Kimley-Horn, the city's consulting engineers and consultants on this project. Some of what we're going to cover is going to be an overview of the project, some traffic analysis, the design concept, and we'll have a Q&A session at the end. So now that you know who I am, let's find out who you are. You should see a little PDF pop up on your screen that has a little poll. Fill that out and answer it, so we'll have that information. While I introduce and turn things over to our Assistant City Administrator, Chuck Downham. Chuck?
Thank you, Victor. As Victor indicated, I'm the Assistant City Administrator for Spring Hill. I want to take a second to welcome everybody tonight. We're really excited about using this virtual platform. Hope it will be a success for everyone and very informative. I want to take a second to introduce Lee Schumann, who's the project manager for Kimley-Horn. He oversees all of the consultant team for Kimley-Horn as well as the sub-consultants that are involved in the project. We also have Brad Waldschmidt, who's a traffic engineer with Kimley-Horn. He'll be addressing some of the different traffic and design considerations this evening as well. As Victor noted, we'll have a question and answer period at the end of the presentation that Kimley-Horn will be providing. During that time, you'll be given an opportunity to post questions and comments. The intent is to provide a panel, which will be composed of Victor, myself, Lee, and Brad. We'll attempt to address those questions. You'll see at the bottom of your screen a Q&A dialog box. We encourage you as the presentation is going on, if you have comments or questions, take the time to post a question and we'll do our best to address those at the end during our question and answer session. We expect that we'll receive a fair number of questions tonight. We may not have sufficient time to address all of those. And so we would encourage you to use a comment card that will also be provided. Reference will be made at the end of the presentation this evening that you're welcome to fill out. All of the presentation materials that you'll see tonight will be posted on the city's website, along with detailed plan documents that you can look at in greater detail at your leisure. And again, we encourage you to use the comment card. I want to take a second to also let you know that we've got 2 meetings tonight. This will be the first of 2 sessions, the session starting at 6, and then we have another one that will start promptly at around 7 o'clock. So we'll be wrapping up our question and answer session just a few minutes before 7 in order to give ourselves time to reset the presentation and be ready to go at 7 o'clock for those that want to participate in the later session. I'd like to take a second to pull up our poll to give you a little bit of an idea of the folks that are attending the meeting this evening. So you can see from the poll, and we appreciate everybody taking the time to respond back, the majority of the folks that are attending at this point in the meeting are the affected residents, with a number of others basically in the concerned citizen category. So we appreciate the folks that are most directly impacted for taking time to be a part of the presentation this evening. With that, I'll go ahead and introduce Lee and let Lee start the presentation. Lee?
Thanks, Chuck. All right, we'll get started with a little bit of project overview. Our first slide here is a map showing the location of the project. So just to get everyone dialed in and oriented to where we are. Buckner Lane is east of Highway 39 and west of I-65. And it is north of Duplex Road and south of Thompson Station. Our project limits are from Duplex Road to Buckner Road, which is approximately 1.9 miles. This project is part of a much needed emphasis on providing vehicular capacity and more direct access to I-65 in neighborhoods in the northern portion of Spring Hill. It's important to note, though, that the project will be designed and constructed in 2 phases. The south segment, which is shown in orange, will be from Duplex Road to approximately 500 feet north of Wade's Crossing. The north segment, shown in blue, will go from the end of the south segment to the Buckner Road intersection. There are several reasons this project was broken into phases. The most important reason is schedule. As most of you are aware, the design of the I-65 interchange and extension of Buckner Road, which is shown in green, is underway, and construction is scheduled to be completed in May 2024. With the widening of Buckner Lane being an integral part of the interstate access request and build grant for the interchange, and with approximately 100 properties potentially affected by the construction of Buckner Lane, Breaking the project into phases provides a lower risk of the entire project being delayed in right-of-way negotiations or utility conflicts. It also allows flexibility in the schedule to navigate the narrow corridor of the south segment of this project. Based on that, we felt we had a higher potential for benefit in a phased approach and more potential for delays in the design and construction of 2 miles of roadway. In addition, you will see in red the realignment of Buckner Lane from the Buckner Road intersection to Thompson Station Road. This project is part of the Alexander property development and is scheduled to be completed prior to the Buckner Lane and the I-65 interchange projects. Now tonight, we're specifically talking about the preliminary design of the northern segment of Buckner Lane, which, as I stated, is from basically 500 feet north of Wade's Crossing to the Buckner Road intersection. So where are we in the process? Currently, we're finalizing the preliminary design of the north segment. Preliminary design represents roughly 30% of the design effort. And our goal here is to understand the design elements and impacts before we get into the detailed design in later phases. The next upcoming task on site will be the geotechnical investigation. The purpose of this is to get soil and pavement borings along and adjacent to the roadway to get an understanding of the pavement and soil conditions to aid in our design efforts. Some of you may have received letters explaining small cores may be taken along your property adjacent to the road. And for the rest of you, you may notice short lane closures for the coring of the existing pavement. Luckily, this is a fairly quick process. Next, we're in the process of gathering your feedback. So please ask questions during the presentation. As Chuck mentioned, there's a Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. And please be sure to fill out your comment card afterward. We'd love to hear what you have to say. Finally, we're preparing to begin the right-of-way design services, which is the next phase in design. In this phase, we will be getting into a more detailed design aspects of the project and working to nail down the construction limits of the project. So as most of you know, traffic is an issue now, and with the redistribution of traffic from the I-65 interchange and new development along this corridor, I think we can all agree increased capacity is needed on the roadways. As I noted earlier, this project will provide connectivity to the newly constructed duplex road and the upcoming interchange. Its construction is also very integral to meet the requirements of the interchange build grant, as well as it provides other modes of transportation with the proposed sidewalk and shared use path that run along the roadway. Last but not least, we want to be cognizant of the impacts of this project. A lot of consideration has been given to limit impacts to properties along this corridor. So many of you may remember about a month ago, we posted our conceptual design and a questionnaire to get your feedback. And we received over 80 responses, which is pretty exciting for us to have this much interest in the project. So we really appreciate everyone's comments and thoughts on the project. We noticed 3 major themes that developed when reading through everyone's comments: property, neighborhood impacts, neighborhood, school access, and traffic, congestion, capacity, which essentially is please limit your impacts and how are you going to address all the traffic? Over the coming slides, hopefully we can answer and address your concerns. So as you know, Buckner Lane is primarily a 2-lane arterial road with little to no shoulders, ditches on either side, and it serves about 9,500 cars a day. For our proposed typical section, we have taken the city standard arterial section, which has a 95-foot right-of-way. And after collaboration with the city staff and feedback from you, we brought it down to an 85-foot right-of-way width in an effort to provide the needed capacity for future traffic, as well as bike and pedestrian facilities. We tried to do this while limiting our footprint along the corridor. Now, this has been done through narrowing the grass strips and narrowing travel lanes and the removal of bike lanes. Also, we've added curvature along the alignment to minimize impacts to properties directly adjacent to the road, as well as to take the straight as an arrow racetrack feel from the road. Once again, please be sure and use the Q&A function if you have a question during the presentation. Next, Brad Waldschmidt will discuss the traffic analysis performed for this project.
Thank you, Lee. I appreciate that. So as we move to the next slide, we all know that Spring Hill has been growing and continues to grow. And in particular, this area of Spring Hill along the Buckner Lane area is going to continue to grow in the future. And Lee's hit on some of those. As we move to the next slide, some of those reasons for the future traffic growth is due to developments like the Alexander property, as well as the Buckner Road extension to the future I-65 interchange. And that's what's leading to our traffic forecasts showing that in 20 years, traffic volumes along Buckner Lane will reach 24,000 up to 38,000 cars per day on Buckner Lane. And that's what has driven a traffic analysis to show that Buckner Lane really needs to be 5 lanes when all this traffic growth occurs out in this area. So as we moved into our traffic analysis, we took all this into a consideration. And what we noticed is several traffic signals will be needed along this corridor of Buckner Lane. And tonight, again, since we're focusing on this northern piece of the project, we're going to focus on the 3 intersections that are shown on your screen on blue: Twin Lakes Drive, Stewart Campbell Point, and Spring Station Drive. So as we zoom in on the next slide to those intersections, what the traffic analysis showed was needed was based on the traffic volumes on Buckner Lane, as well as the traffic volumes that'll be using Twin Lakes and Stewart Campbell and Spring Station, there will be traffic signals needed at each of these 3 intersections. And in conjunction with those traffic signals, signalized pedestrian crossings will also be provided so that pedestrians and bicyclists using the sidewalks and the shared use paths will be able to cross through the intersection and cross Buckner Lane, which will be very helpful and valuable, especially given the project's proximity to Spring Station Middle School and Summit High School. Additionally, each of these 3 intersections, because of the traffic volumes that will be turning at these 3 intersections, we're also incorporating into the design left turn and right turn lanes to minimize impact to the general through movements along Buckner Lane. So these are the inclusions in the design based on the traffic analysis to handle the growth that is forecasted to occur out here, primarily at these 3 intersections where we think there'll be more turning movements, as well as these 3 traffic signals. So those have been really some of the driving force helping to influence the preliminary design. With that, I just want to remind everybody, if you have any questions, just a reminder, please use the Q&A at the bottom as shown here. And I'll turn it back over to Lee to kind of walk through the preliminary design. Thanks.
Thanks, Brad. So here's an overview of the north segment. The next few slides break down the preliminary design into smaller segments, so you can see in more detail. These next few slides are available to download. Well, since we can't meet in person, I'd like to go over the exhibits with you to explain a few things and hopefully make it easier for you to review at home. This slide is the beginning of the north segment. In these exhibits, you will see the existing additions, which are shown in gray. The bold lines represent the proposed layout as well as future striping. The red shading represents the permanent right-of-way that will be needed for the project and will essentially encompass the roadway, sidewalk, and shared use path. In green, you will see the limits of the slopes, which represent the length or area it will take to tie the side slopes back into the existing ground once the improvements are made. This is a temporary slope easement and will be grass when construction is complete. The blue shading represents the temporary construction easement, which is room given to the contractor to maneuver as they construct the project. The hatched red lines in red are permanent drainage easements that encapsulate drainage structures outside of the right-of-way to give room for the city to provide maintenance. Now, in terms of the preliminary design, you can see the tie point that will be made between the northern segment and the existing roadway, where we go from 5-lane section to a 2-lane section. Also on this sheet, you'll be able to see some preliminary drainage. The black shaded rectangles are inlet locations. The arrowed lines are ditch locations, and the open-ended rectangles are head walls, which capture drainage from adjacent properties. On this slide, we are adjacent to the Church of the Nativity, the way to orient you a bit. As you can see, the property owners' names are in gray, and that'll help you as you review from home. A few new aspects on this slide is the location of a raised median, which is shown roughly in the middle of this slide in the center turn lane. Also, you can see where we have added curvature on the far right side of this page to minimize impacts to the homes that are directly adjacent to the roadway at the Glessner intersection. We are now at the Glessner, Spring Station, and Stewart Campbell Point intersections. Spring Station and Stewart Campbell will be signalized intersection, and once downloaded, you will be able to see the location of these signal poles and mast arms. Also on this slide is the first of 2 box culverts for this project, which is located between the Glessner and Spring Station intersections. This slide is located at Twin Lakes Drive, which shows the second box culvert. You can also see the dashed purple line that represents the existing right-of-way that runs adjacent to either side of the roadway. You can also see another dashed line that has the text PL, which represents the property lines along the corridor. On this slide, you can see the road beginning to curve and open up. Once again, curvature is added to limit impacts to the properties at Geneva Drive and Eric Court, which are directly adjacent to the roadway. The widening of the road is the approach to the Buckner Road intersection. And finally, we're at the Buckner Road intersection. A few things to note on this slide. The capacity for future dual lefts have been accommodated for in this design, which is shown by the channelized striping at the intersection. You can also see several properties have a line through their track number, which means at this point in the design, we do not anticipate any impacts to their property. So I know this was a lot to take in. So once again, if you have questions, please use the Q&A function and we'll be happy to answer them at the end of this presentation. So our next steps. What we're headed into is taking our preliminary plans and advancing them to a right-of-way set, which means we will be setting the right-of-way and easement lines for this project. Once the plans are in place, we will host another public meeting to talk over that design and also the right-of-way acquisition process. And then later in the year, we will begin the acquisition process for the northern segment of this project. Here is the schedule. After we finish our right-of-way design this fall, we're scheduled to begin the right-of-way acquisition process in November. That will be followed by the beginning of the design process of the south segment in December. Long term, we hope to begin the right-of-way acquisition process on the south segment in July of next year and begin construction of the northern section in March 2022 and the southern section in March 2023. You should see that a poll has popped up on the screen. So if you wouldn't mind, please let us know what your biggest interests or concerns are on this project.
And while that's going on, panelists, if you wouldn't mind unmuting your video, and we'll start to get our questions queued up. We have a few questions that have come in already. So let's get to the first question while everyone is answering the polling question, and that is, can you talk more about why the new road won't have traditional bike lanes next to the traffic lanes?
It's a good question. I might call on Lee to help us address that. Obviously, one of the major drivers in the design approach is to try to minimize impacts. Specifically, the extent of right-of-way acquisition and right-of-way impacts. Obviously, the wider the road, the more right-of-way that will be necessary for it. But Lee, may call on you to help us address that from a design perspective.
Yes, sir. I mean, you hit it on the head there. We were able to save 3 feet essentially by pulling the bike lanes off of the traveled way. The other consideration that was given was that this is a 5-lane arterial road, and we felt it would be more comfortable for the average bicyclist and the average person to be on a shared use path than against the traffic volumes and that are on Buckner Lane.
Great. So why don't we pause and take a look at the polling results.
It looks like traffic congestion and capacity is one of the key concerns. And so we'll attempt as part of our responses to the questions that are being posed to weave that into the conversation if we can. Kevin, do we have another question or comment?
Yeah. So our next question is, how soon will the homeowners along Buckner Lane find out how this will affect their property lines, such as right-of-way?
Really good question. I know, Lee, you covered that a little bit during your overview of the schedule. You might want to go back and recap the right-of-way process and specifically the milestones that we're expecting to take place in the early fall.
Yes. So, I mean, the exhibits that you've been given that you can download will show you, and I want to remind you, these are preliminary plans. We have not made it to the right-of-way phase, but they'll give you an idea of essentially what the impacts will be on this project, though they aren't final. We are starting the right-of-way process or the right-of-way design process here in the next several weeks. And we look to host a meeting in October, and that meeting in October will be a time that we go into a little bit more detail and show you where the easements are and the permanent right-of-way ticks are. And then each property owner will have an opportunity beginning sometime in November to talk with the right-of-way acquisition team, who will then begin explaining the process of the right-of-way acquisition for their project, their property.
Great. All right, so why don't we do another question? Okay, so here's a question from someone that lives on Eric Court, which is a cul-de-sac, and they want to know how they'll be able to turn left, which I presume they mean how to turn left on the Buckner Lane.
Kevin, do you want to field that question using the plan graphic from the latter part of the presentation package? That might help to illustrate what's being proposed in terms of design.
Yes, although I will, oh, here we are, Eric Court right here. Perfect.
Right. So, Lee, your thoughts from a design engineering perspective, and we may want to call on Brad if he's available.
From a design perspective, unfortunately, Eric Court falls in very close proximity to the center of this intersection. And you can see, in order for them, they would have to cross 6 lanes of traffic or 5 lanes of traffic to go northbound. And so for the effort to provide or limit turning movement conflicts, we've had to block this access with a small raised median. So the folks on Eric Court will have to go southbound on Buckner Lane and take Geneva Drive around to Buckner Road in order to go northbound on Buckner Lane.
Thank you.
Okay, our next question asks about noise, and the question is there any provision for noise abatement?
I think generally speaking, you know, we obviously have a major road corridor, and we have had a number of people in the different comment opportunities that we've provided along the design process have expressed concerns not only about the aesthetics, but also the proximity of traffic to homes and so forth, and what are we doing in terms of potential noise abatement. The road corridor itself, there is not a current design intent to include barrier walls or noise barrier walls as part of the design process. And a lot of that has to do with the insufficient amount of right-of-way to accommodate those types of structures. not to mention just the abruptness that often those will create from a design and aesthetics perspective. What we hope to accomplish along the corridor are different types of aesthetic treatments, landscaping, buffers, and other types of screening measures that could serve in part to help dissipate and address some of the noise associated with traffic along the road corridor. Can we completely eliminate noise? Absolutely not. The road is already a very busy corridor. It's already a noisy corridor. Our hope would be that we can introduce measures and work cooperatively with property owners associations to introduce measures that hopefully will help to reduce some of the impact associated with noise on the corridor. Lee, anything else to add from a design perspective?
I think you hit most of the topics.
Okay, so our next question is on schedule, and they want to know when there will be a meeting to talk about the southern section of the Buckner project.
So we have a meeting scheduled. It will be early next year, probably in February. We intend on starting the preliminary design of the southern section late this year. So once the preliminary plans have started and we have something to present to the public, we're expecting that to be around February 2021.
Okay. And so here's a question. I'm not quite sure I understand the first part, but maybe you will. For 2748, it appears a left turn cannot be made out of the drive. Is that correct? If so, will a U-turn be allowed at the Twin Lake intersection? So I will go back to that. You guys will have to.
That may be something we have to address later, and maybe get with this person, because I'm not sure that address off the top of my head.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not either.
Chuck or Victor, if you guys.
I think the fundamental question there is, are we going to allow U-turns at any of the major intersections? If they can't turn left out of their driveway because of a raised median, are we going to design in U-turns at the major intersections is, I think, the real question there.
Well, no intention of blocking any private drives with the median. So, and we do not have accommodations for left turns at Twin Lakes, or U-turns, pardon.
Okay.
What I might suggest, because that series of questions involved a specific property, we would encourage that property owner to reach out to either Victor Lay or myself. I'm Chuck Downham again. Let us pull up the plans. We can schedule a virtual meeting with you, or a call, or even have you drop by City Hall and visit with us, so we can go over the plans in a little bit more detail. I understand there may be another question regarding that same property. We can certainly get into specifics of that involving any property owner along the corridor, and schedule a one-on-one conversation with them if that would be preferred. That way we could get into a lot more detail probably than this type of setting.
Okay. And there is another question on the same property, but it's about removal, I think, of a structure. And so I think maybe it would be helpful if we just answered generally any questions about property impacts at this point. In other words, when will we have that information? I don't think we have that information yet, do we? That will be in the next phase?
Well, I think as the plan documents have illustrated, and it probably would be something that we would encourage the property owners to use some of the plan documentation that we're going to be posting to the city's website, that you can actually zoom in and look very closely and helpfully determine the extent of the impacts that may exist on your particular parcel. Again, I think it's probably worthwhile for the property owner to reach out to the city and let us schedule a meeting with you directly, so that we can sit down and review the plans in detail and get a better understanding of the exact impacts that you're inquiring about. We're doing our best to avoid impacting property owners, but at the end of the day, you know, there's going to be some level of impact for just about everyone along the corridor, with few exceptions. But our goal is to try to minimize those the best we can, given the design considerations and other parameters that we have to work within as far as putting this project forward.
Brad, I think you've got some input on the specific property question.
Yes, I just want to say that I believe the one of the questions was about a parcel on the south of Twin Lakes Drive and east of Buckner Lane. And, you know, I believe the answer is similar to the Eric Court comment, where because it's so close to an intersection that our traffic forecaster is showing will need to be much bigger, and therefore a wider Buckner Lane near a traffic signal. Because of that, those reasons, that was the reason for the preventing the left turns at that location. I think it was a similar thought to the Eric Court rationale.
Okay. Well, I think we've come to the end of our questions. Last call for questions. Okay. Well, I'll turn it back over then to Victor and Chuck if you want to close this out.
Thank you, Kevin. We appreciate you moderating the Q&A session for us. The last slide, you'll see some information regarding a comment card that we encourage residents to fill out and provide input on. Feel free to submit as many comments as you'd like, either with an individual card or submit multiple cards if you'd like. We'll be posting the presentation to the city's website, so you'll have access to all of the presentation materials. We've also got a series of very detailed PDFs that we're going to be posting on the city's website as well, that you can look at and download and look at your particular property in a lot more detail than even the PowerPoint slides that we shared with you all this evening. We're asking everyone to please submit your comments and questions back to us by July 22nd. We'll take those and we'll try to respond back to them. We found that the best way to do that is to actually assemble all the questions together and then create a narrative response that we'll be posting on the city's website to give everybody the benefit of all the great questions and comments that are being posed, but also the responses from the city. And that will hopefully assist you in not only understanding the question that you may have posed, but also all the different perspectives that are being shared by property owners all up and down the corridor as we continue to try to address those concerns as they come up. But again, we appreciate very much you all participating in the virtual meeting this evening. We hope it was a useful format for you. Again, with the goal of trying to share information with you and to bring you along in the design process. We look forward to you all being a part of a future meeting. If anyone that's on the meeting this evening wishes to participate in the second session, it will be starting at around 7 o'clock this evening. Feel free to look over the materials, and if you have other questions, you're welcome to dial back in at 7 o'clock and post those questions, and we'll do our best to try to address them in the time that we have on the second session. Victor, Lee, Brad, any other closing comments before we wrap it up?
Just want to say thank you to our consultants for their work thus far. And thank you to the citizenry, all of those who are viewing this. And as Chuck said, we look forward to future engagements with you.
Very good.
Have a good evening.
Hey, guys, I'm going to jump in. We had a couple more questions come in since we have extra time. Do you want to take a minute or two to answer them?
Absolutely.
Okay. So we have 3 more questions. The first one deals with the amount of time the project is taking. They're concerned that the project will take as long as duplex, and they think the duplex road project has been taking longer than it should. And so I guess their question is with respect to the schedule. How long do you think the project will take?
Well, I know from our tentative project schedule that we have, that we're programming for about an 18-month construction schedule that will follow immediately after our right-of-way acquisition, finalizing our plans and permitting. Lee, please correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I believe we were anticipating about 18 months to complete this segment of the work.
That's correct.
We certainly understand the concerns that are raised in terms of duplex road. It certainly has been a very complex project. It is a state-managed project, so there's a little different process that they follow in terms of the construction. But it was a very extensively involved project in terms of stormwater structures, utility relocations, just a lot of different things that while we expect some level of that with this project, it's not to the level that we did with Duplex Road. So hopefully we can bring the north segment of Duplex along within that 18-month time period. But Lee, any further comments from you?
Once again, I think you hit all the topics to address that.
Thank you.
Okay, the next question says, I'm a new resident and want to see how the traffic pattern will change.
It's a great question. I'm going to point toward Brad to see if I can get him to address traffic patterns and how we see traffic evolving over time as not only the project is being built, but what we can expect in the future. Brad?
Yeah, thanks, Chuck. So we have performed a traffic analysis like we mentioned, and Spring Hill does have that on record as far as the traffic analysis. But just to kind of generally talk about it, I want to ask Kevin, while we're talking about this topic, if you could go back to one of the previous slides that shows the future Alexander property as well as the future interchange location. That might be a good visual reference. So as development like the Alexander property occurs and the future interchange, more traffic is going to use Buckner Road running east-west between Highway 31 and Buckner Lane. That's a great one, Kevin. Thank you. More traffic can use the east-west road of Buckner Road to get to the future interchange of I-65. And in addition, more traffic will be using Buckner Lane, the north-south, to again access the development activity and the interchange. So that will be increased traffic, which is one of the motivators for this project. One thing to note as well, though, is that the Alexander property, it's a development, but it will also be providing much internal road network that will provide connectivity. So, for instance, connections to the schools to the south. Those schools currently can connect south to the neighborhood, or they can use Buckner Lane. There will be a road network connection within that yellow polygon you see for the development to actually get to the future Buckner Road extension and interchange. So, while there's traffic growth and some of those traffic patterns are going to change, like I've tried to describe here, there will be some additional road networks kind of in that yellow area of the development, as well as the Buckner Road extension to the interchange, that will also come into play to sort of give people more options to get from point A to point B. And Chuck, I'll see if you had any other thoughts you wanted me to hit on.
I appreciate that, Brad. I think you covered it very well.
Okay.
Hopefully that addressed the comment question that we received. Kevin, what else have we heard?
So we have a question about the property. So what will be done with the existing farmland along Buckner Lane between Buckner Road and Thompson Station Road? What is the proposed start date from which direction?
That's a great question, and certainly a lot of dimension in terms of the answer on that. The best thing I can suggest right out of the gate would be for the person that's inquiring about that to get on the city's website and query 2660 Buckner Lane. That's the name of the project. It's a large mixed-use master plan project that was approved back in 2017. They're going through a plan amendment process right now, so you'll see some very current information on some very minor changes that the developer is proposing to make. The expected timeline as far as the project will basically develop starting on the western edge of the property, and then it will move to the inner core and eventually to the eastern portion of the site. The sequence basically is a combination of residential and retail in the early phase, followed by more residential and more commercial in the latter phase, and then ultimately office development once the interchange is constructed. So you'll see it's a multi-year, multi-phased development approach that the developer's taking with this. There'll be a lot of road work done within the site, a lot of utility infrastructure being installed. And as I mentioned, it's a mixed-use project, so you'll see a wide variety of residential, retail, and office uses all being introduced to the property over a very long period of time. We expect that project to build out for the next 15 to 20 years. But the interchange is a key piece of that development starting. So hopefully that's addressed your question on that. Kevin, what else?
Great. So we have a question. Someone would like to know how they can find out more information regarding right-of-way on the north segment.
And hopefully During the presentation, you saw several different slides toward the end of the presentation that go into detail as far as the extent of the impact, both for right-of-way and easements. Our recommendation would be for that person to take a look at those slides, as well as the PDFs that we'll be posting to the city's website. And if they have specific questions about a particular parcel, feel free to reach out to us, and we can certainly go over those in more detail with them. But hopefully the information that we've got, not only with the presentation, but also the individual sheets, will give them answers to those questions.
Okay, and a couple more questions. This one I think I can answer. Is the meeting at 7 cover the same material? And that answer is yes. We have a question about the anticipated speed limit of the road.
I'll let Lee or Brad address that. We have a design speed as well as what we anticipate to be the posted speed.
The posted speed will remain the same. Our design speed will be 45 miles an hour, and it will be posted at 40.
Okay. Thank you.
And then one last question asks, the northernmost section of Buckner Road, what will happen after it is realigned? What will happen to the existing road? Will it be covered in grass, for example?
It's a great question. I don't know that there's been any final plans developed for that. There's been a lot of different things kicked around, including basically almost like a rail to trail type approach where the road would be abandoned and put into some type of a more passive use. We expect that the westernmost edge of the Buckner Lane development project will be residential uses. So hopefully that will very much complement the adjoining neighborhoods that will be right across the way from that. But there's been no specific plans at this point for what the city or the developer intends to do with that. I'm confident there'll be a lot more discussion around that and a plan developed in hopefully very full cooperation with the adjoining neighborhoods. We'll do it in such a way that everybody will hopefully benefit from that, whatever it takes the form of.
Okay, and now we really are at the end of our questions. That was the last question.
Okay. With that being the last of the questions, we appreciate everybody's attendance tonight. Feel free to come back at 7 o'clock if a question should come to mind that you'd like to pose, or if you'd like to see the presentation yet again, you're welcome to do so. Again, we encourage you to use the comment card. You'll see a link on the presentation at the end. We also will be posting all of the presentation materials from this evening, so would encourage you at your leisure to take a look at those closely. If you've got questions, feel free to give us a comment card or pick up the phone and give either Victor Lay or myself, Chuck Downham, a call here at City Hall. We'll be happy to schedule a time we can go over those in more detail with you. Again, we appreciate everybody's attendance tonight. Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you.
That are on this session were not in attendance at the last. Would that be beneficial to folks?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the first session, we had a question about why there won't be bike lanes, traditional bike lanes on the road next to the traffic lanes.
I think as we shared at in the first session, there was careful consideration given to including them, but also one of the primary goals of the project was to try to minimize the impact to adjoining properties. And obviously doing that, one of the considerations was basically pulling in the right-of-way and with it certain improvements. We felt that because it being an arterial and the volume and level of traffic traveling on it, especially a build-out, that bike and ped traffic would be much safely accommodated, basically using the multi-use trail, which is a proposed component of the right-of-way cross-section, as well as the sidewalk system. Lee, Brad, any further thoughts on that in terms of why we did not include the bike lane?
I think you hit it there, and that goes back to Victor's point of balance. We have to balance several things on this corridor, and we were able to save a little bit of width on the corridor width and feel like that we provided separation for the roadway for the average user and children that possibly be riding their bicycle with all the neighborhoods adjacent to this roadway. So it was definitely a balanced consideration.
Okay. And then we also had a couple of questions about noise.
Excellent question. One that we've received a fair amount of feedback from some previous public comment sessions that we had. It's a lot of things certainly to consider in trying to abate or address noise along a major corridor. We recognize that there's going to be a lot of homes that are going to be in very close proximity to it. And obviously with that, we've got to be very sensitive from a design perspective to try to mitigate or minimize the impact from noise. We've had several people that had commented or inquired about whether the city was planning to install noise barriers or walls basically along the corridor to help limit the noise projection from the road. Obviously, it's certainly something we could consider, but from a cost perspective, as well as just the right-of-way impacts, again, not having sufficient room to construct those types of barriers. And also from an aesthetic perspective, it really creates a very harsh edge to the road network itself. So our preferred design approach will be one of trying to look for landscaping and buffering measures, as well as fencing that we might be able to install along the edges. We'll be working closely with property owner associations, homeowners groups, as well as individual property owners to look for opportunities to plant evergreens and other vegetation along the corridor that will help to reduce the noise. I can't say that we will be able to effectively eliminate all noise associated with the corridor, but it will certainly be one of our ongoing goals to do what we can to try to reduce the noise impact. Brad, Lee, any other comments, or Victor?
I don't have any.
Okay.
No comments. Did a good job.
Okay. We also received a handful of questions about turn movements, how people would be able to make left turns out of their development, for example.
Hey, let Lee or Brad try to field that particular item, because I know we provided a pretty comprehensive response on that.
Sure, I don't mind taking that. Kevin, if you could move forward in the presentation to where Eric Court intersects with Buckner Lane. I think that's a good example. Part of the traffic analysis and engineering design that we looked at is as this road gets wider, especially at some of the larger intersections here, we're looking at what the intersection of Buckner Lane and Buckner Road will look like in the future. And just kind of to the left of that intersection, you see a cul-de-sac, which is Eric Court. And today, Eric Court is right on a 2-lane road. But as you can see on the screen, on the design, Buckner Lane will be getting much, much wider. And so for that reason, a hard median is being designed in front of Eric Court so that only right turns can occur. And while that is an inconvenience, of course, the reason is that we are trying to look at, the turning movements and crossing the many lanes of pavement to turn left in and out of Eric Court can be a problem and a concern sometimes. And so there's a few locations like that along the corridor, not everywhere and not in many locations, but there are some where that engineering and process and discussions with the city was applied to try to find locations like this, where a left turn turning out of an intersection such as this would just be crossing many lanes of pavement. And so for that reason, this is occurring in some locations. And Lee, I'll turn to you if you have anything else to add.
No, I believe you hit all the major points there. I mean, the other consideration, is the fact that for this particular location, the queuing of that left turn now, and especially if it ever develops into dual lefts, will be very difficult for a person to get out and go northbound from Merritt Court. Not only mentioning the number of conflicts that will cause by trying to cross that many lanes of traffic.
Okay. And in the first session, we also had a question asking about the property between Buckner Road and Thompson Station Road.
Very good question, and I may elaborate a little bit, especially if folks are not familiar with the development of the Alexander property, which is in the map graphic that you have on your screen. There's been a lot of conversation about what happens to the old Buckner Lane once the new alignment, the realignment takes place, basically cutting across. You can see the little dots on the graphic as Buckner Lane basically is repositioned further to the east. We've had informal conversations with the developer, but nothing has been formalized at this point in terms of what that might take the form of. There's been conversations about converting it to a trail or some type of a passive pathway. That certainly is a possibility, but again, nothing's been really formalized. For the folks that may not be familiar with the Alexander property, that is about an 800-acre tract of land. It's a project that was fully entitled back in 2017, and it's just now getting underway in terms of design and development. It's going to be a multi-phase, multi-year project. We'll build out over at least 15 to 20 years. The mix of uses will include a variety of different residential uses as well as retail and office. In the immediate near future, the emphasis will be on residential and a light level of retail development. But as the infrastructure continues to build out, including most critically the interchange, we'll start to see more intensive development taking place, obviously because of the proximity and access directly to the interstate interchange at that point. And hopefully that will mitigate and minimize any what I'll call outside or immediate vicinity impacts as that project develops out. If anyone's interested in finding more information on the project name is 2660 Buckner Lane. The project right now is undergoing a plan amendment that is being considered by the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. So you'll see in the past agenda packages as well as the upcoming one, a ordinance that's being proposed. And in it, you'll see a lot of plan documentation and details about the project and how it's going to be developed in phases. So feel free to reach out on the city's website and look over the information. If you have any questions on it, feel free to reach out to my office or the planning department. I'm sure they'd be happy to field any questions you might have on that.
Okay, just a couple of more questions. One question asks about the southern section. When are we going to learn more about the southern section of the corridor?
I let Lee circle around on the project schedule diagram, and I think it hit some general milestones that I think will give people a pretty clear picture of when we plan to start that. Lee?
Yep, and thanks, Kevin, for bringing that up. So we began to start the preliminary design of the southern section in December 2020, so late this year. We have on our internal schedule to try and have a public meeting sometime February 2021, very similar to this for the southern segment.
Okay, and then the last question expressed concern about the length of time that it took on duplex, and they're concerned that they don't want that length of time to be on this project too. And if we could address that briefly.
Well, I know that Lee, at the outset of his comments, talked a lot about the design approach and the fact that we're breaking the project into two segments, a north segment and a south segment. And part of that is to help manage the entire process in terms of the length of time it takes to go through design, right-of-way acquisition, and ultimately construction. So by breaking it into a smaller segment, we hope to be able to turn the construction around. We've placed in a temporary schedule or a tentative schedule about 18 months to complete that north segment, and then about 18 months as well to complete the south segment, which will happen about a year, or will start about a year afterwards, after we get the north segment underway. Lee, any further insights in terms of just that sequence and some of the reasoning on why we approach it that way? Our hope is to maintain a very tight schedule with that. Obviously, Duplex Road had a lot of complexity to it. It's a much larger project than what we're envisioning in this first segment. So we're hoping that it will certainly turn around much quicker than the Duplex project.
No, and Chuck, I think this slide shows a very good representation of the many reasons why we chose to phase it. But you can just see between the blue and the orange line, I mean, taking the orange line out of this project, that cuts 40% of the roadway that we have to, or the earth that we have to open at one time, the drainage that we have to install, the utilities that we have to relocate. And you also tell that's a very tight area in there. So breaking this project into phases, it does give us a little bit more freedom to make significant improvements and build a significant portion of this project, but not have 2 miles of roadway opened up and utilities being relocated and drainage being put into the ground all at one time, which essentially will, well, we shouldn't say will, it could slow the process down if we hit any unforeseen circumstances in the construction process.
And that was our last question that hadn't been addressed yet from the first meeting.
Thanks, Kevin.
So I guess we'll call on the participants that are still with us. If you have any final comments or questions, feel free to use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We'll keep an eye on that, but I want to take a second to go through this last slide in our presentation, and that's basically the link that's available to the Buckner Lane project. In it, you'll see a comment card that will be available along with all of the presentation materials from tonight's meeting. That will include the PowerPoint presentation that we've gone through, as well as a set of PDFs involving each of the different project sheets that Lee had shared with you earlier in the presentation this evening. We would encourage residents to take a look at the presentation at your leisure, to download those project sheets and to zero in on the one that may directly affect your property or your neighborhood. Study it closely. Use the comment card to ask questions or provide additional input to us. We'll certainly take that into consideration and respond back to you. We're asking everyone to please provide your comments back to us by July 22nd so that we can integrate that into our ongoing design process. We're about to finish up our preliminary design and head into the next phase of the design process, as well as kicking off the right-of-way process. So our presentation included some calendar milestones that we encourage folks to keep an eye on. We'll be providing additional notice for future meetings and public meetings, but feel free to use the information that we've got on the website to look at and ask questions and continue to provide great input to us. We certainly appreciate everybody's input so far on it. With that, Kevin, do we have any other questions before we try to wrap up?
Oh, actually, I think we do. Oh, well, no, we don't. I'm sorry. Someone was just commending us for the information and thought it was very helpful. So compliments are nice to get.
Yeah, we'll take those.
Like the input. That's
Yeah.
good. Well, I think we're at a point where we can wrap up. I want to take a second to thank our panel this evening. Lee, Brad, you did a phenomenal job with the presentation. Victor, always a pleasure. Kevin, we appreciate you working behind the scenes to make this happen tonight as far as the technical side of things. And special thanks also to the public, the folks that participated in the meeting tonight. We hope the virtual format you found informative and engaging. Unfortunately, with COVID-19, we can't meet with you in person, but we hope to use this kind of format in the future should the need arise to do that. But always feel free to reach out to us either by email or pick up the phone and give us a call here at City Hall. We're happy to address any questions or schedule a meeting where we can talk in more detail about the plans as we continue to move forward. Again, thanks everyone and have a great night. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.